Welcome to the Private School Leader Podcast, where private school leaders learn how to thrive and not just survive as they serve and lead their schools. I strongly believe that it is possible to have a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader. And my passion is to help you figure out exactly how to do just that right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And I'm your host, Mark Minkus. So I want to start today's episode by saying two words that will cause you to feel a certain way. And I'm not sure exactly how they're going to make you feel, but I'm going to say them and then ask you a question. So ready? Here are the two words. Enrollment season. Enrollment season. So does that cause joy and happiness and excitement or does it cause stress and anxiety and uncertainty and thinking about a grind and thinking here we go again and chasing down families and not being sure who's coming back? And what emotions come from the two words enrollment season for you? Well, if you're listening to this in real time, we're right around the end of January, beginning of February. And I've been talking to my coaching clients, and I'll tell you, when I ask them the question, what's taking up the most headspace, really since winter break, and even the week before winter break, almost all of them have said, well, it's enrollment season coming up, so ... I'd say probably about 80% of my clients that's the answer to that question. And for me, for 31 years, I was at a school where we had a traditional, quote unquote, traditional enrollment season where, you send out enrollment contracts and then you remind families of the deadline and you start making phone calls and you send reminders, and when the deadline has passed, then you chase down families and you meet with the director of enrollment and go over a long list of kids whose parents have not yet re-registered for the fall. And, do you know if anything that's going on with this family, why they might not be coming back? Is it that they're just disorganized, so on and so forth? So that was my experience for 31 years. But at my most recent school, 2 years ago, the school switched to a continuous enrollment model. And several of my coaching clients have also switched to this model, some in recent years, and some have been doing it for 8, maybe 10 years. And so I'm not sure where you're at on this issue. I know that ISM says that about 30 to 40% of independent and private schools in America are using a continuous enrollment model or are working towards implementing this approach in the near future. So 30 to 40%. But if you're in that 30 to 40% and you're already using a continuous enrollment model, I still want you to stick around, and I'll tell you why in a few minutes. So on today's episode of the Private School Leader Podcast, I want you to consider that it may be time for you to consider a continuous enrollment model. All right, before we jump into that, I just want to remind you of a couple things real quick and then give you a free gift. So first of all, I do have a couple of coaching openings right now. I'd love to work with you one-on-one and help you solve your biggest problem. I'd love to hear more about what's your biggest problem. And you can learn more about that at theprivateschoolleader.com/coaching. And also a couple weeks ago, I launched a brand new digital course called Parent Academy. And Parent Academy is your step-by-step framework for building effective partnerships with parents while reducing your stress and anxiety. And it's an online digital course, and there's 4 modules, and you'll learn how to do all of the things that you are stressed about and have better meetings and understand why they are the way that they are and how to work with certain kinds of parents and outliers and all those kinds of things. I'll teach you that. But then I'm going to teach this step-by-step framework to your teachers, because Parent Academy also comes with 2 45-minute webinar trainings for your teachers with a 27-page printable notebook and guided notes and discussion questions. And just think, you could use that at a PD. You could use that for onboarding in the future for new hires. It's really been a game changer. I mean, there's been a lot of interest in that since it's launched, and a lot of leaders out there that are pretty excited about it. So I'd love for you to get involved, and you can just check that out at theprivateschoolleader.com/parent academy. And then one last thing, I want to give you a free resource. I just want to say thank you for listening to the podcast. This is episode 120. It's hard to believe that we have 120 episodes that I've been talking to you and you've been showing up and listening. And I just want to say thank you so much. And I hope that these episodes have been helpful to you. And as a way to say thank you, I want to give you this guide. It's called 7 Secrets to Improving Teacher Morale. And I think as leaders, we're always looking for ways to improve teacher morale, but it's kind of hard to quantify, and it's kind of hard to know where to start. Well, I want to give you a step-by-step plan, and you can grab that at theprivateschoolleader.com/morale. That's the 7 Secrets to Improving Teacher Morale. That's free for you. Just go to theprivateschoolleader.com/morale. All right. So it may be time for you to consider a continuous enrollment model. And what we're going to do on this episode is, first of all, define a continuous enrollment model. Then I'm going to give you 6 pros and 6 cons to using a continuous enrollment model, and then give you some next steps. Now, I said a minute ago that if you're already using this at your school, you should stick around. Well, why? If you're already using it, why should I listen to an episode that's telling me maybe I should consider using it? Well, here's the thing. When we go through the 6 pros and the 6 cons, I would love for you to think about, okay, the 6 pros, are these things that are happening at my school? Or do we need to, really double down on that and optimize that part of it? And then the 6 cons, are these things that we're unfortunately letting slip or that are problem areas for us, and what can we do to fix that? So I really think this episode is for everybody. It's for school leaders that don't have a continuous enrollment model at their school to consider it, but it's also for leaders that have one to check in with the process and see if it needs to be improved. So hopefully I've convinced you, and let's get into it. So the timing of this episode is really intentional. I told you if you're listening in real time, it's the end of January, beginning of February. And that's because, many schools are into their enrollment season. And if you are going to consider a continuous enrollment model, you're not just going to all of a sudden decide to do that. It's going to take time. You need a runway. And so if it's, if you're hearing this in, real time in early February, then, you're about 11 to 12 months out from next year's re-enrollment season. And so it is a feasible timeline, and you have to start somewhere. And maybe it's that you start talking about it with your, with other leaders, with the leadership team at your school, or maybe with your board president if you are the whole leadership team. Maybe it's something that you start to ask a couple of leaders in your geographic area that use a continuous enrollment model, and ask them, well, what do you think about that? You have to start somewhere. And so I'm not saying that this is going to be easy. I'm just saying that if you're going to ever do it, you have to start at some point. And what I want to do, honestly, with this episode is just really stimulate your thinking about it, and then you decide what action that you want to take. So let's start by defining it. What is the continuous enrollment model? Okay, so rather than opt-in re-enrollment, which is the traditional model, where all parents or guardians sign new contracts and enroll their children every year, continuous enrollment is an opt-out process. So instead of every year asking your families to opt in, you're going to ask your families once to opt in, and then they have to opt out. And so this model assumes that once a student is enrolled in your school, they're going to continue attending until graduation unless the family opts out or requests to withdraw. Let's say partway through a school year that, the one parent has to move to another state for their job or things of that nature. But the idea is that they're in until they tell us that they want out. And enrollment contracts are typically rolling, and the school checks in with families to confirm or update details each year. And of course, there's communication about it, and there's reminders about, when it's going to happen, and here's the deadline if you do want to opt out. But you're in until you're out. And many colleges and universities have been using this model for decades, and it's something that's a little newer. Maybe the last 20 years it's grown in popularity, especially maybe the last 10 years in a lot of private and independent schools. And, this business model is becoming much more common in North America. If you think about Netflix or HelloFresh or Amazon Prime or Walmart Plus, you sign up once, and then that subscription fee comes out once a month. And so that's the definition. And so now what I want to get into are 6 pros and 6 cons that will help, again, stimulate your thinking about the continuous enrollment model. All right, pro number 1 is increased retention. So the sample size is growing for schools that have been using this, and the data is growing, and the data is showing increased retention rates over schools when they compare their retention rates using the continuous enrollment model versus using the re-register every year model. So increased retention. And one of the reasons is the psychology behind the continuous enrollment model and how it reduces friction for parents. So instead of every year being a decision year and every January and February being a decision year, we want to, get out of that mindset and have it be that my kid is here, and that the only decision year is when they graduate from your school, whether that's in 6th grade or 8th grade or 12th grade, where are they going to go, after they age out of your school. And so that is one of the continuing to emerge is the amount of data to support that, but the data that is available is showing increased retention because they're in, and we're not asking them every year, hey, are you still in? They are speaking up to say, I'm out. Okay, pro number 2, earlier confidence in enrollment numbers. And when I spoke to some of the directors of enrollment, at my most recent school and also at a couple of other schools I'm thinking Pennsylvania, California, and Arkansas immediately come to mind. So kind of, all over, that this was something that was big when I was asking those questions, that you've got earlier confidence in your enrollment numbers. And we know that those enrollment numbers drive some pretty big decisions. And so, it's about the budget. How many teachers do we need? Or how much fundraising do we need to have for next school year? Can we proceed with buying that van to drive the kids around? Or can we proceed with this or that? A lot of times as school leaders, we're kind of waiting around on families who, let's face it, they blow right past the stop sign that is the deadline, and they haven't re-enrolled. And then we're pursuing, asking, nagging, nudging, all the words. And we're not really sure. We have a lot of undecided, or we think so. And, how many different categories have you seen when you're looking at families who haven't re-enrolled past the stated deadline? This continuous enrollment model really lets you know, and it lets you know earlier. And that leads me to pro number 3. Pro number 3 is way earlier if someone is considering leaving. And so you have a longer runway to work with them to retain them. And so we've all been there where if you have a family who doesn't re-register, and maybe, there's a wide range of reasons. Maybe they haven't been that happy. Maybe they're not sure if they can still afford it. Maybe they're thinking about moving to a different school district where the school system is better, quote unquote, all of the things. Okay. and they're not sure. And so then we wait until they decide, and sometimes they're deciding this in May or June. And not only is that a problem because of what I just mentioned about budgeting and forecasts and staffing needs and all that, but really it's a problem because you don't have a chance to work with them to try to retain them and try to solve the problem because it's already a done deal. The school year's almost over. They've already decided. They've already toured the other school, whatever. Okay. I'm not saying you're going to keep every single family if you go to the continuous enrollment model, but what I am saying is that they're put on the spot with a financial pinch that is real if they don't speak up, and their deposit is withdrawn from their account through fax or however your school will set it up. They're going to speak up. And they're going to say, well, we're not sure. I'm not comfortable, with that. And so I want to opt out right now and maybe we'll blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. But then you can get busy with that family and be like, hey, you want to come in and talk? I just want to hear kind of what's going on. And, is there something that we can do to help? And I'm not saying that you're going to fix them all, but I'm saying that if you have a longer runway than you used to have, it's going to make a difference. Okay. All right. Then pro number 4. A more focused and less stressed enrollment team. So this is another big thing that I heard from the directors of enrollment that I spoke with preparing for this episode is that, how much stress you go through. And I know that I'm talking to leaders that have all different sizes of teams. Some of your schools, you are the whole team. You're the enrollment director and the development director and admissions and fundraising and all the things. Okay. But some schools have a small team or some schools have a larger team. But regardless, enrollment season causes a lot of stress on a lot of people, and it's a lot of work. And so if you think about it, people that I talked to, they told me that they actually have more bandwidth for recruitment because they're not spending so much time on chasing down contracts and sending the reminder emails and more likely spending time on the phone and calling people and getting voicemail and all of those things when there's a deadline that is passed, when people have to opt in and return that signed enrollment contract, that if with a continuous enrollment model, there are emails that are planned that go out to remind people of the policy. We're not doing anything in secret. We're not doing anything unethically. But boy, does it open up the schedule and open up the hours for your enrollment team at that time of year. And so it's something to consider. And especially if you're a one-person show or a two-person show, if this could lower the stress, lower the total amount of work every single year, then, you're also not having all of those meetings. I used to sit in a lot of meetings, and they were necessary meetings where, probably at least once a month, and then maybe it got even more frequent than that, where I was sitting down with the director of enrollment and the head of school and going through all the kids who were in my division whose families had not yet re-registered them. And, hey, Mark, is there anything going on with this family that I need to know about? Like those kinds of things. You're not having those meetings either. And so a more focused and less stressed enrollment team. And then pro number 5 is a simplified re-enrollment process for families. Here's the thing. There's a lot of businesses out there that are competing for the dollars that we spend. And a lot of them pretty much offer the same kind of products or services. And the thing that sets businesses apart is how simple is it? How stress-free is it to buy the thing, to buy the product, to buy the service? That's what people are looking for, is ease. And if there's less paperwork and fewer deadlines for families, they like that because it's simplified, okay? And that's what they're becoming more and more used to in their daily lives, is that companies are climbing over each other to try to simplify the process, to make it simple for you to do business with them. Well, let's not be the one outlier that's got all the paperwork and the deadlines and the forms and which form am I supposed to turn in by which date. We want to reduce that friction. And continuous enrollment can eliminate a lot of paperwork for families because they need to sign a contract once. And they don't really have to worry about deadlines unless they're opting out. And so I just want to add that some continuous enrollment model schools make payment deadlines more flexible and allow parents to pay their re-enrollment fees over the course of a couple of months. And what I'm getting at there is that sometimes it's a big pinch for families. In January, February, they're still maybe trying to pay off some credit cards from the holiday season. That, if you're set up with Facts or something similar, it's not a big leap to be able to, whatever that re-enrollment fee is, instead of it being due at the time of, the re-enrollment contract, that it could just be spread out. And then it's not as big of a pinch. And so again, that's just less friction, and it's a simplified process for the families. And that brings us to pro number 6, and that is that families are very used to doing business this way. I mentioned before Netflix, HelloFresh, Amazon Prime, Walmart Plus, Dollar Shave Club. There's an endless list. And, families are very used to sign up, set it and forget it kind of way of doing business. And I want you to think about your younger parents. The parents are getting younger all the time. As leaders, we, depending on your age, I'm 57, and I see some of the parents of younger students in the school and think, wow, they look really young. And that's just because I'm getting older. But my point is this: the younger parents in the school, they don't really know the previous model of doing business. They know the subscription, sign up once and you have to opt out way of doing business. That's very common for families that are becoming more the generation of digital natives. They don't want the fuss. They don't want the hassle. And so pro number 6 is that families are very used to doing business this way. So then that brings us to the 6 cons. So con number 1, the first year is a heavy lift for the enrollment team and the head of school. So if you're deciding to pivot to a continuous enrollment model, it's not like you can just, buy a piece of software and load it onto your computer and it's over, it's done. There's going to be meetings, there's going to be reviewing enrollment contracts, there's going to be looking at language, there's going to be working with the company that perhaps it's the company that's doing your your monthly tuition, whether it's Facts or a similar company. And many of them now, they're the ones that there's an expansion to that, or it's something that is your overarching software management system, enrollment management system. And hopefully, and then, that's another con that we're going to get to in a moment, is about the interface between your existing system and this. But the point is that it's going to be a heavy lift. I don't want to try and persuade you that, this is like, falling off a log. It's super easy. There's going to be people out there to guide you. But here's the thing. It's a heavy lift, but every single person that I spoke to said that it was so worth it, and that you get that time back starting the first year, that your first enrollment season when you're using the continuous enrollment model, and then every year after that. So on the one hand, con number 1 is the first year is a heavy lift, but I am hearing that everyone is saying that has done it is that it was worth it, they like it, and that you get that time back in the future. All right. Con number 2, part of the heavy lift is communicating with families and creating a mindset shift. So one director of enrollment in Pennsylvania told me that year 1 is a teaching year. And so that makes sense. And, change is hard for most people, even if the outcome is going to be really awesome. I had a head of school in Arkansas. He told me, communicate early and often when you're making this change. And, Just think about over time how resistant people have been to advancements in technology. When they invented the car, all the people that drove, horse-drawn carriages were pretty upset. And, just go on down through history with the resistance that was put up to new types of technology. And now we're getting some of that with AI. There's going to be some resistance and some discomfort from the families because they're used to doing it one way. But that's your job as the head of school, as the division leader, or to guide your enrollment team when it comes to the communication of the family. So early and often and clear would be the best advice. Con number 3 is extra work for canceled contracts. What I am hearing also is that if you choose to implement a continuous enrollment model, that some families may decide to leave prior to the next school year. And so there's going to be a refund policy in there, and then you're going to have to refund a certain percentage or a certain amount, and there's credit cards involved and things of that nature. And, that's going to cause some additional work and maybe a learning curve for your business office. And maybe you are the business office. I get it that I'm talking to leaders at small schools all the way up to leaders at big schools when I put out an episode. But you're applying it to your situation. And so, canceling contracts, that turns into more work. But I'll tell you this, people leave during the school year anyways. And if you're not using a continuous enrollment model, and then you're still dealing with parts of this, it might just be a little bit less confusing. So con number 3 is extra work for canceled contracts. Con number 4 is losing focus on telling your story. So let me tell you what I mean by that. I always say that the key to retention is treating every family like a new family. And I have heard, and then also in the articles that I read for this episode, which, by the way, I'm going to take good care of you in the show notes as usual. theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 120. I have 4 or 5 articles there for you. Pros and cons type articles from different reliable sources for you to just continue to learn and stimulate your thinking on this. But in reading those articles and talking to different people, different clients, people at different schools, there's the risk that some complacency will set in when it comes to families opting in once and then they're just there. And what we certainly don't want to do is, if they set it and forget it, we don't want to set it and forget them. And so telling our story often in many different places, why our school is special, the storytelling, the images of happy kids doing interesting things on the website and in the weekly newsletter, and all of those things. What we don't want is for families to feel like they are not appreciated, to feel like it's a done deal with them, to feel like they're taken for granted. And we don't want that either. And so my point, though, is that sometimes there could be some of that complacency that could slip in with this enrollment model of continuous enrollment. And that brings us to con number 5, which is making sure that you are in compliance with state laws. I'll only spend a minute on this one. In the show notes, I have a guide for you that is just a kind of a quick link for each of the 50 states with some things about compliance. The company that you work with will obviously help you with this, but different states have different laws when it comes to these types of opt-in once, but then you have to opt out type contracts, as far as like how many years is it in place. So for instance, if someone enrolls in your state as a first grader, do you have to do X, Y, or Z ever? Or is it every 3 years or 5 years, or when they're, whatever. So it's something that's an additional step. But once you know it, you'll know it. And like I said, the company that you work with, the advice that you get, will help you with that. And then that brings us to con number 6, and that's technology fit and distribution of tasks. And so facts, or a reasonable facsimile to it, something like it, your automatic withdrawal. And if you're not doing that and you're still having people mail you checks, which I know there's some schools out there that are still doing that, again, maybe this episode is going to spur you into step one, which is to get some automatic withdrawal set up at your school. And then step two, further down the road, would be the continuous enrollment model. But I know that most schools listening already have that in place. So this has to work with your system that's already in place. And then you also have to provide clarity for your enrollment team and your finance team as far as who's doing what. And this, maybe the busy season for the finance team was later in the spring, but now it's going to move up to late winter instead of spring. And just so that we're not duplicating tasks or that tasks are being dropped and left undone, is that there's going to need to be a lot of communication surrounding this new way of doing things, timing, responsibilities, things of that nature. Okay? So what are the next steps then? If you're really, all I want you to do is to start thinking about this. So read the resources in the show notes at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 120, and maybe talk to one or two other leaders in your geographic area or someone that you met at a conference and ask them, are you using the continuous enrollment model? How long have you been doing it? Do you like it? And if you don't know what leaders in your area are doing, maybe reach out to your school leadership organization, whether it's NAIS or ACSI or Prisma or NCEA or CSI or others that are out there. And they could probably guide you in the direction of, well, why don't you talk to this person and this person? And so again, just maybe getting more educated by reading some of the resources in the show notes and talk to another leader or two at another school that's using it and pick their brain. And maybe you decide to go in this direction. I just want to stimulate your thinking. So what are the big takeaways from today's episode? Well, the continuous enrollment model is, rather than an opt-out re-enrollment, where all parents and guardians must sign new contracts to enroll their kids every single school year, it is an opt-out process. So rather than opt-in annually, it's opt-in once, and then you have to opt out when you decide that you want to leave the school. And this model assumes your kid is enrolled and that they'll continue attending until graduation unless that family opts out or requests to withdraw. So that's what it is. 6 pros: increased retention, earlier confidence in enrollment numbers, way earlier if someone is thinking about leaving, a more focused and less stressed enrollment team, simplified re-enrollment process for families, and many families are used to doing business this way. And then 6 cons. The first year is a heavy lift for the enrollment team and the head of school. Part of the heavy lift is communicating with families and creating a mindset shift. Number 3, extra work for canceled contracts. Number 4, losing focus on telling your story and complacency setting in. Number 5, making sure you're in compliance with state laws. And con number 6 is the technology fit and distribution of tasks. And your call to action, I've kind of mentioned it twice now, is really to just take a look at some of the resources in the show notes and maybe reach out to one or two other leaders that are using the continuous enrollment model and just talk to them for 15 or 20 minutes and ask them, what do you think? So let's wrap it up. I want to just remind you about something that's very, very important, something that takes up a lot of headspace, and that is that, you might have a parent living rent-free in your head right now. And they might be living there 24/7, and then it's hard to get them out of your head when you're trying to fall asleep or you're at the dinner table or even driving to work or in the shower. And trust me, I've been where you are. I used to get super anxious and sick to my stomach just thinking about talking to certain parents. And parent issues dominated every aspect of my work as a private school leader, and I was stressed out all the time, and I didn't know what to do, and I didn't have a plan, and all I had was a lot of anxiety and fear and insecurity. But that's why I created Parent Academy for you, because I want you to have a plan. I want you to go from feeling anxious and stressed out about working with parents to feeling confident, calm, and relaxed. And so I want you to check out Parent Academy, this digital online course that's a step-by-step framework for you, but it's also got those 2 webinars where then I can teach your teachers. So you can check that out at theprivateschoolleader.com/Parent Academy. And then one more free resource for you. This one's called The 6 Things That Every Private School Teacher Wants from Their Leader. This guide is a 6-page PDF that will be a game changer for you. And I guarantee that if you do these 6 things, the teachers at your school will be happy to follow you. You can grab that at theprivateschoolleader.com/guide. The 6 things every private school teacher wants from their leader at theprivateschoolleader.com/guide. And one last request. If you've gotten value from this podcast, I would love it if you would just please share the link to the podcast with another leader in your life, another leader at school or someone you met at a conference or anybody that you know that's in private school leadership. Just share the link with them. And then I also believe that you have a good eye for a rising leader in your school. Who's that rising leader that is showing that potential? Send them the link to the podcast as well. And maybe you can be the one to help spur them on to filling what will in the future be many openings in private school leadership. So I would just really appreciate it if you would share the link with other leaders in your life and rising leaders at your school. And I've been your host, Mark Minkus. I just appreciate you so much and all the amazing work that you're doing at your school. Thank you for taking some of your precious time to join me here today. And I'll see you next time right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And until then, always remember to serve first, lead second, and make a difference.